Hello, this is Dr. Mewborn, and this is Christology. We're in Lesson 14, and today we're looking at the lineage of Christ. Let's go ahead and jump to our study, and we're going to start by talking about God will build His church. In this wonderful passage in Matthew 16, verses 18 and 19, it reads, "And I tell you, you are Peter, and on this rock I will build my church, and the gates of hell shall not prevail against it. I will give you the keys of the kingdom of heaven, and whatever you bind on earth shall be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth shall be loosed in heaven." This is a wonderful passage where Jesus is speaking with Peter, and he's telling Peter, upon this rock I will build my church. Well, who is the rock? The rock is Jesus Christ, because it's His church and He's the one building it. And who is it going to be built upon? Well, it's built upon Jesus Christ, because He is the cornerstone. Some religious groups would say that Peter is the rock in this passage because his name refers to rock. And in this passage, that's not what Jesus is saying. He's already explained that being the cornerstone, either you will trip over Him as a stumbling block, or you will be built upon Him or step upon Him. And that's a powerful statement, as we see throughout the New Testament, that He is the rock upon which His church is built. So when He says, I will build my church, Jesus is saying that's what I'm going to do. Now, that's helpful when we look at prophecy being fulfilled, because the Messiah was to come and He was to save His people from their sins. And that's what we see that He does. So He's fulfilling prophecy, but He's also helping us to understand why it matters that His lineage leads us to exactly Him as the person that we read about, of course, in the Bible. Now, I wanted to show you this slide, and this is just a slide with all the books of the Bible. It gives us the law books, the history books, the poetry books, the letters and minor prophets, the Gospels, church history, letters, major prophets, and prophecy. And you see all those broken down. It's very easy to see. What we're going to look at for the next few moments is 4 books here: Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. We're going to focus in on these Gospels because they help paint the picture of what Christ was doing, that He came, and what His genealogy is really about, and why does it matter for us today. So as we continue on, Matthew is a Jew writing to Jews to present Jesus as King of the Jews. Mark was a Roman writing to Romans to present Jesus as a servant. Luke was a Greek writing to Greeks to present Jesus as the perfect man. John was an ordinary fisherman writing to ordinary people everywhere to present Jesus as the Son of God. This matters because leading up to Jesus Christ's coming, everything had to fall perfectly in place to give us what we call the infinite God-man, who is the person of Jesus Christ. And so we call Him being fully God, fully human, the infinite God-man, because He had to be 100% God. He had to be 100% man, or else the system would completely collapse. And that system is that Christ had to come as God so that He could beat death and sin itself, but He had to come as a man, because unless He came as a man, He couldn't truly be our substitutionary atonement through the cross. And so it's very important that He was those things. Now, we talked about Matthew, and what does Matthew do? It traces line back to Adam through David, and that's important. In Luke, we see it traces line back to Adam, and it gives us an understanding of where Christ came from, or who He is, and why does that matter, and the Gospels help us to see that. Now, before I show you a slide of those different people in the Bible, the lineage and the genealogy of Christ, I want to share with you just a little bit of context in Matthew. Matthew 1:1, the book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham, as it reads for us. So we're seeing here the importance of Jesus Christ in lineage form, that He is coming as the son of Abraham, as the son of David. He will sit on the throne of David, for the everlasting throne of David. And we see here it's the book of the genealogy of Christ. So we're seeing what came before Him leading up to Him Himself. There is a strong Jewish flavor, about 50 quotations from the Old Testament in the book of Matthew. The theme of Matthew is Jesus, the Jewish Messiah, sent to bring the kingdom of God to the entire world. Now, as we continue on in Matthew chapter 1, verse 17, it says, "So all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations, and from David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations." So what we see is Abraham to David, God's promises fulfilled. David to the exile, God keeps his word through all circumstances because they're going to go into a time of exile, which will be a very, very tough time for the Jews because of their disobedience. And then from the exile to Jesus, we see God's faithfulness displayed through the Messiah, all the way to the Messiah. And so when we look at this slide at this point, we see Matthew and Luke, two different accounts of the genealogy of Jesus Christ. Now, one goes back all the way to God. The other one goes back to Abraham. And if you study this long enough, you're going to see that there's a lot of different names on here, and they do not mix well. Some names are different. Some names have been changed, so it seems. And so how do we make sense of the different genealogies that are given to us in Matthew chapter 1 and Luke chapter 3? Most conservative Bible commentators would clearly say this: the reason why we see the differences in Matthew and Luke is because Luke is referring to Mary, who we know as the mother of Jesus, the genealogy of her that goes back to David. And then what we see in the book of Matthew is the genealogy of Joseph, the legal father of Jesus Christ. Now, he was not the true father of Jesus Christ because the Heavenly Father is the father of Jesus Christ. But that's how commentators, most conservative commentators, would explain the differences there. And that's just a great way to understand what's happening. We see here another picture of the genealogy of Christ going back from Adam, which I love to look at dates sometimes, because with Adam we see 4004 BC to 3074 BC, the time there. And then, of course, going down through all the people, you get to Noah to 2948 BC. And then you go up to Abraham, 1996 BC. And then going on to King David, branching off with the line of Mary, the line of Joseph, based on Matthew or Luke, and then we get to Jesus Christ, that there's both connection to Jesus Christ, and a very good chart right there. Now, as we continue on, the lineage of Christ, a few of these things we've talked about in the past, but we can see here how the prophecies of Jesus Christ were fulfilled from the Old Testament to the New Testament, and some of those are such as the seed of woman, the line of Seth, the line of Noah, and all these in Genesis, descendant of Abraham, the line of Isaac. We see pretty much the family tree of Christ given to us. We see also the line of Jacob in Genesis 28, the line of Judah in Genesis 49. It's where we get Judaism as well as Jews. We get Boaz and Obed, Jesse and David, 2 Samuel. The genealogy of Christ in Matthew chapter 1, then the genealogy of Christ based on Luke chapter 3, verses 23 through 38. And we see those things. And I love that picture of the genealogy or the family tree of Jesus Christ. One of the things that's interesting about Jesus' lineage is the women that are in the lineage of Jesus. There are 5 women: Tamar, Rahab, Ruth, Bathsheba, and then Mary. And these 5 women were very, very special in the life of Christ. 2 of them came from camps outside of the Jewish camp, and that would be Rahab, who was a Canaanite, and Ruth, who was a Moabitess. But all of these women came from different places, hard times, maybe a loss of a husband, maybe a loss of a father, maybe going through a period of wickedness, but God saw fit in their lives to use them to bring forth what we know, of course, today as the Messiah of the world, Jesus Christ. And so we know that Jesus Christ existed before he came into human flesh, but God was using these women to bring about the the flesh of Jesus Christ, which is so amazing when you think about lineage and genealogy in of itself. All right. Well, as we look at God's promises, I want to show you just a few ways that God has been faithful through the Old Testament, and of course, working through the genealogy of Christ. We see in Genesis 12, 1 through 3. It says, "Now the Lord said to Abram, go from your country and your kindred and your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make of you a great nation, and I will bless you and make your name great, so that you will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you, and him who dishonors you I will curse, and in you all the families of the earth shall be blessed." So through this man Abram, which will become Abraham, God is giving him a covenant, and he's saying, I'm going to bless you. I'm going to give you an offspring, in a sense, or in a way, through Isaac, which will be a promised son. There will come generations of people that will bring forth what we know as, of course, Jesus Christ the Messiah. All right, and this is what he's speaking of to Abraham in this passage. Now, pushing forward, we go from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Jacob has a son named Joseph. And what do we see in God's promises to Joseph, or through Joseph possibly? We see something special in Genesis chapter 50, verses 18 through 21. It says, "His brothers also came and fell down before him and said, 'Behold, we are your servants.' But Joseph said to them, 'Do not fear, for am I in the place of God? As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. So do not fear. I will provide for you and your little ones.' Thus he comforted them and spoke kindly to them." This is a picture here of Joseph being, his relationship with his brothers being restored. If you remember this wonderful passage here in Genesis chapter 50, it's speaking of Joseph being restored with his brothers after a time of them selling him into slavery. He's in jail. He actually interprets the dreams of Pharaoh. He becomes second in command with Pharaoh. The land goes through a time of famine. He is the only one in the land that can help all the people in the land, because God's given him the wisdom that he needs. And through that time, his family needs to come to Egypt to get grain so that they can actually live. And this is a powerful thing, because they meant it for evil, to hurt him and put him in prison and possibly sell him off to die. But God meant it for good, that he would save really his people, so that through him, really through his brother Judah, would come the Messiah. And so through the lineage of Judah, through the generation of Judah, we're going to see the Messiah come forth. I love that passage. "As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today." Joseph is a type of Christ, a true type of Christ, that he brought salvation to people. Even though it was physical, he brought salvation to a particular group of people. Another great illustration of God working through lineage and genealogy is with Ruth. If you know the story of Ruth, Ruth goes with her mother-in-law. What happens is, a man named Elimelech is married to a lady named Naomi, and they have two sons, Mahlon and Chilion. And what happens in the story is so sad, because all the men die, all of them. And what happens is that Naomi says, "I'm becoming bitter. I'm going home. I'm going back to Bethlehem, where I will try to find someone to care for me." And Orpah, her other son-in-law or daughter-in-law, leaves her, but Ruth says, "I'm going to go with you," and she decides to go with her. And so what happens after that is they go back to Bethlehem, and while they're there, she goes to find a field to glean in, so she can. This is kind of like the welfare program for those who are in need, and she begins to glean in the fields of a man named Boaz. And Boaz can become her kinsman redeemer and actually protect and somewhat save, if you will, her and Naomi from their life of complete poverty and complete just being separated from the camp, and he's the one that can do it. And it works out in this incredible story where Ruth, who's a Moabitess that came from a place of having many idols and many different gods, here she is now in the field of a person named Boaz, and she had already told Naomi, I'm going with you. May your God be my God and your people be my people. And that's what she decides to do. Well, what's so special about this is Ruth and Boaz end up getting married. In Ruth chapter 4, verse 13, 14 says, So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, who has not left you this day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel. And it says in Ruth 4, 18 through 22, Now these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron, Hezron fathered Ram, Ram fathered Amminadab, Amminadab fathered Nahshon, Nahshon fathered Salmon, Salmon fathered Boaz, Boaz fathered Obed, Obed fathered Jesse, and Jesse fathered David. We see this beautiful picture of a marriage that takes place between Ruth and Boaz. And if you can look at these names, you're going to see something very special. You're seeing the lineage of Jesus Christ played out in this. And it all begins with the beautiful picture of sovereignty, God's grace that was brought about in Ruth's life. And Ruth was a part of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, of course, with Boaz. And we see that they are great grandparents of David. Jesse, David here, you see how that'll end up being in their family line. Very wonderful passage to speak of the lineage of Jesus Christ. Now, why does this matter? Why does the lineage of Jesus matter? It establishes the historicity of Jesus. That's number one. Number two, it authenticates the kingship of Jesus. Number three, it reveals the faithfulness of God. And number four, it magnifies the grace of the gospel, that God is doing all of these things to bring about an incredible salvation that everyone needs. And the Bible says all who call upon the name of the Lord will be saved. 2 Timothy 2:13 says, if we are faithless, what does the Bible say? He is faithful, for he cannot deny himself. God is faithful, even though people may not be. God is faithful to his promises. The lineage of Christ truly matters. This has been Lesson 14, the lineage of Christ. Good to be with you today. Hope you have a great rest of the day, and God bless you. Bye-bye.